Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. Today is Friday. Hopefully, you guys are ready for the weekend. My name is Jesus Nava. I'm the Director of Client Training and Education for TradeStation Securities. It's always a pleasure to talk about TradeStation. And today we're going to talk a little bit about charting and some of the chart types that are available in TradeStation that you can use in your trading. So thank you guys for being here. So to be more specific, we're going to talk about time and activity-based charting and what are some of the differences and similarities in those two bar building techniques. We do an additional session that talks about the price-based ones, but that's since there's many variations to a price-based chart, we usually dedicate a whole session to that. So today is all about time and activity-based charting. Let's go through some of the disclosures before we start. Keep in mind that every symbol and idea that I talk about is for educational purposes only. These are not recommendations of TradeStation. Also, that active trading is not suitable for everyone, and that past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. For additional information on these disclosures, please visit the link right there on the PowerPoint slide, www.tradestation.com/important-information. All right. Thank you guys for being here. Let's go over to the TradeStation platform and let's pull up a symbol. I'm going to be using Apple as an example. All right, so what you're looking at here is a daily chart of Apple. When we talk about a daily chart of Apple, we're talking about every single candlestick representing a whole day worth of trading activity. So you see the highest high, the lowest low, the opening price, and the closing price of each trading day. Of course, the chart is going to skip weekends and it's going to skip holidays, and that's why you don't see any gaps. If you want to see the specific date of a particular candle, one thing that I do all the time is click on the background and hold my mouse button so that you can get the data tips window. And you can see, for example, on this one, the one that the one that where the vertical axis is, this is the bar with the date of July 6th. You see that on the corner, July 6th, 2022. So for any bar you want to see the date or the time of, it's just a matter of clicking on the background, moving it to the bar that you want to get, the details on, and the data tips window will provide that information. In addition to daily, and daily being one of the time-based charting because it's all based on time, I mean, no bar here will be more than 1 day or less than 1 day. It's a daily bar, and that's the way that the time-based charts are built. Every time that the time that you specify passes, then the bar will close and the new one will open. If I go here to the time frame and I click on 5 minutes, for example, then I'm choosing to split up the data, all the trading activity for Apple, into 5-minute segments. And every candlestick, of course, is representative of the data or all the trades that happen within each one of those 5-minute bars. One of the things that you may want to think about is how to split up the trading day, for stocks, for example. And this is one of the things that I go over in charting when I talk about time-based is that you want to make sure that every bar pretty much represents the same thing. For example, on a 5-minute interval, yes, every bar is 5 minutes. But if you split up the chart, for example, into 60-minute intervals, this is where we start thinking about, okay, does every bar represent the exact same thing? Now, I know that you put in 60 minutes and, the very first bar of the day is going to be exactly 60 minutes because it opens at 9:30 and it goes all the way to 10:30. That's 1 hour, 60 minutes. But what happens toward the end of the day? The first hour of the day, let's go ahead and check. Right here, I'm on the first candlestick of yesterday, and you can see that the time says 10:30. Another characteristic of charting is that whenever you check the time of a particular bar, it'll show you the time that the bar closes. And this is something important to keep in mind, especially if you're going to be doing some custom analysis techniques and strategies, because when you reference the date of a particular bar, that date, the date and the time, that date and time will be the closing date and the closing time of the bar. Just keep that in mind. And that's why when I went over here to the very first bar of the day, it says 10:30. Even though the market opens at 9:30, the time is 10:30 because that's the time that the bar closes. So this one in particular, which is the first candle of yesterday, closes at 10:30. The next one closes at 11:30. The following 12:30. Next 1:30 or 13:30. Next 14:30, which is 2:30. The next is 15:30, which is 3:30. And then the next one closes at 1600. Why? Because the market closes at 1600, 4 p.m. So in reality, this bar over here does not mean the same thing as the prior ones, because this last bar over here is just 30 minutes. Even though you selected to view a 60-minute chart, the last bar is truncated at 30 because that's when the market closes. It's something to be aware of. And a lot of times, you know, traders that use time-based charting usually think about that and try to adjust the time interval so that every bar represents the same amount of trading activity. If you were to, instead of using a 60-minute, if you were to use a 65, and notice what I'm going to do, I'm just going to type in a 65. You see it in the command line, just the number 65, and I'm going to hit enter. By the way, that's something that it's a shortcut, you know, while you are in a minute interval, if you type in a number and you hit enter, TradeStation Charting will take that as a command that you want to build a chart with that number of minutes. Try that on a minute chart. So right now, I was on a 60-minute, I typed in 65, enter, and it created a 65-minute chart. So pretty cool, huh? And you can do any type of minute increment. In fact, when you go to the time frame, some of the time frames here are what, you know, product owners thought at the time that they created this menu. They thought that these were the ones that were used the most. But a lot of times you're going to find something that, or you're going to want to use something that is not here. For example, if I wanted to do a 65-minute chart, it's not on this menu, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that I can create. You can see that I just did. I just typed in 65 and enter, and I created a 65-minute chart. What's the point of creating a 65-minute chart? And why is it different than a 60-minute? Well, the difference is obvious. You know, one is 60, the other is 65. But the reason why this is this is a chart that gives you more equal candlesticks is because everyone will be exactly 65 minutes. We're not going to have that issue of that remaining bar that is just 30 minutes. In fact, if you look at the closing time of the very first bar, it's 10:35. See, an extra 5 minutes. The next one is 11:40. The next one, 12:45, 13:50, 14:55, and 4 p.m. They're all 65. In fact, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bars, as opposed to having 7 bars. If you go back to a 60-minute, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bars. So by building a 65-minute chart, we're taking that last candle that is just 30 minutes and dividing it amongst the other 6. You know, 6 times 5 is 30. So the math is exact for us to build a 65 minutes that is equal. So a lot of times, you know, you can do math in order to create, you know, time intervals that are consistent and where every candle represents the same thing, you know. For example, if I were to, well, there's a set number of minutes inside of one day. If you think about it, there's 6.5 hours. If you multiply that by 60, you get 390 minutes. So those 390 minutes, if I bring up a calculator, can be divided into multiple things. For example, you can have a 390-minute chart. If I come over here to the chart and I say 390, you know, this is like creating a daily chart, but it's using minute data. I just chose to give me a 390-minute chart, and you can see that the closing time of every candle here is 1600. Now, if I bring up my calculator and I say 390 minutes divided by 2, 195. So if I take a 195-minute chart, I'm creating a 2-bar a day chart. So there's only 2 candlesticks per day. Again, and you can do that multiple times. You know, if you take the 390 and you divide them by 3, then you have a 130-minute chart. If you wanted to have 4 bars per day, 130 minutes. Okay, and so on. You know, so a lot of times take the total amount of minutes divided by an even number, and if the result comes out to be a decimal like a 2.5, then you know maybe that's not the perfect way in which to split up a time-based chart where you want, you know, to give every single candle the same amount of time, just to be a little bit more, you know, representative and not have these odd, you know, candles at the very end. You know, that's just some ideas that that I've learned, you know, throughout my use of the platform. And sometimes when you look at time-based charting, it just makes sense, you know, to divvy up the day into equal segments. Okay, and of course this changes if we're using futures. You have to calculate the total number of minutes. It doesn't make a difference if you're using, for example, 1 minute or 5 minutes, because that's usually a very good number to divide your time-based charts into, because you come up with even candles, unless you have a session that's weird and it ends at an odd number. But most sessions have standard numbers or even number of minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at other time-based charting. If I go here to time frame, of course, all the minute intervals are available, starting at 1 minute all the way to however number of minutes you wanna build. I mean, even if I exceed the number of minutes that there are in the trading session, I know that there's 390 minutes in each session for stocks. Even if I go beyond that, let's say that I build a 500-minute chart, it's not gonna combine data across different days. So this is not a day and change. You know, still the data is going to be split up into specific trading sessions. I can go up to 5,000. Okay, so it doesn't take 5,000 because there's a limitation on minutes. You can go from 1 all the way to 1440. Now 1440 is the maximum number of minutes that there are in a day. But still, you get the exact same chart. It doesn't matter if you do 390, 500, or 1,440, you get the exact same thing, because what happens in a time-based chart is it doesn't combine days together. TradeStation does not support that feature of having a 2-day or a 3-day chart. Not supported. So all you can get, or the most you can get in a minute interval, is the 1 day. Now 1,440 is the maximum, because there's 24 hours in a day times 60. That gives you the 1,440 minutes. So that's the maximum number of minutes you can use in a minute chart. Okay, that's why that's the maximum. Let's go over here to time frame, because in addition to having these minute intervals, daily, weekly, and monthly are also time-based time frames. So we already talked about daily. Daily is the same. This would be the same chart that you would find that would be created if you have a 390-minute. Not exactly. And let's see if I can find a small difference. I'm going to open up another chart here and take a look. And these are some things that you may want to be aware of, especially if we're using or comparing daily to intraday. I'm going to go to a 390-minute chart on this right-hand side. Okay, so the charts look, this needs more data. I want to do 30 days, 60 days. Okay, so they look, rather similar. Of course, this one has more session breaks because I'm splitting up the day that way. I can remove those session breaks if I want to. But the idea here is for me to look at the closing price and compare them. So the closing price yesterday was 144.80, and the closing price here on the minute, the closing price here is 145. Big difference. Now let's go ahead and take a look again, and I want you to pay attention to the little box which is the data tips window. I'm looking at the bar from yesterday, which is October 27th at 1600. Everybody sees the closing price is right there. There's a fourth red number from the top, and it says 145. Now, if I check the closing price of yesterday here inside of my daily chart, everybody sees the closing price here is 144.80. So there's a 20-cent difference between the closing prices. And you may be asking, why is that? I mean, if I'm looking at the entire day, if I bring in 390 minutes, why is the closing price different? Well, let me come here to the 390 minutes and make it 24 hours. I'm going to do 1,440 to see if it changes the closing price. I'm going to check the closing price here on this bar, and the close is still 145. So what's happening here? Well, the reason for that, and for those that are using daily charts, is that there's always an exchange settlement closing price. When the exchange says this is the closing price or the official closing price of Apple, that is the closing price across all platform exchanges. So Apple closed at a specific price that has to be the same price across different platforms. And who dictates that? Well, the exchange is the one that dictates what the closing price of Apple is going to be. So that price gets reflected on a daily bar. However, on a minute bar, what we're looking at is the last trade of 4 p.m. Exactly when the session ends, that's exactly when this intraday chart stops, regardless of what happens after that. You know, this is a chart that respects the time to the extreme, I could say, you know, and if the session says that it ends at 4, it looks at the last traded price at 4, and that is what it shows as the closing price, which may not be the official exchange closing price. And that's why sometimes you're going to see some differences between what the closing price is on an intraday chart and the closing price of a daily chart. Things to keep in mind, and how it's a coincidence that that bar did not reflect the right closing price. Let's see the one before it, the one on the 26th. We have a closing price of 149.51. This one is 149.35. So even, you know, the prior bar also has that discrepancy, which is not an inaccuracy. I wouldn't say that this is inaccurate. It's just the way that the intraday chart works. I mean, you're telling the intraday session that it ends at a certain time, and you're seeing data for that time. You know, if you're building the chart based on time, you want those times to be respected. And of course, it will not reflect any additional prices that come after the closing, which, you know, the daily bar does respect and does take a look at what the official closing price, and will update the daily bar with that data. I'm sure that, you know, in the post market, after, you know, the session ended at 4 p.m., there must have been additional ticks, maybe seconds later. No, it only takes fractions of a second for you to have an update on the price of Apple, which is officially reflected on the daily bar. Okay. Any questions so far? Everybody's good? Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at some additional chart types here. So we talked about time, and I was saying that daily, weekly, and monthly are also based on time. If I build a weekly chart, by the way, I think I said at the beginning that we don't have the functionality of a multi-day candlestick. Well, this is kind of a multi-day candlestick. It's just that you cannot break it into smaller pieces. A weekly type of chart, every candlestick represents a whole week from Monday to Friday. So yes, I still, you know, stand by my statement that there's no a 2-day or a 3-day type of candlestick, but you can build a weekly chart, which is a 5-day candle. And then you can build, you know, a monthly chart, which is a full month. How many trading days are there in a month? Well, it depends on the month. Sometimes it's 22, sometimes it's 23, sometimes it's less, depending on if it's February or not. So it all depends on the month. So every candlestick here could be any number of days, but it's a whole month, you know, from the very first day of the month to the very last day or the last trading day of the month. So let's be a little bit more specific because, candlesticks are built off data. So if there's no market open in any particular day, of course, that's not going to be counted, okay? Let's go over here and take a look at the other type of charts, which are activity based. The ones that are based on time are equal in that regard, based on time. Let me go here to a 5-minute. And I'm going to combine this with a volume study. I want you guys to take a look at something. I'm going to go here to volume average, AVG. I think I'm going to make the style thicker. So this is the volume is going to be a histogram. I'll make it thicker. And the average is going to be thicker as well. I'm going to make that a default. All right. So that's my volume study. All right. So because I'm looking at volume because I want you to also take into account, what you've selected as the interval of the chart, which is 5 minutes. So every bar represents about the same, it represents exactly the same amount of time. But when in terms of activity or in terms of volume, they're all going to be different and all over the place. If you're looking at a 5-minute candle right now, it's going to have much less activity than a 5-minute candle from the beginning of the day. And that's very clear right here on today's session. You can see that we have very big spikes of volume at the very beginning of the session, and then the volume just dies down. Right now we are at noon, and you can see that the volume barely gets, up halfway to the average. Does that make sense? So if you look at volume, then these are not very representative of activity. Is it fair to see, or is it fair to compare a 5-minute candle that happened at 9:45 in the morning? Which one is the one at 9:45? All right, this is the one. This is the 9:45 candle, the third candle of the day. It had, how much volume? 2.8 million. 2.8 million shares traded versus the one that happened just before the current candle, which is the one at 12:50. How much volume is here? It's close to 1 million, but if you compare the two, one has 2.8 million shares traded, one has 1 million. Let's just round it up. Then we're not comparing apples to apples. This is very far off if you're taking into account trading activity. They mean the same thing based on time, but in terms of trading activity, one is heavier than the other. And if you have studies that are, sensitive or dependent on volume, then this is a big thing to keep in mind. Because if you have an indicator that is sensitive to trading activity, you would probably want to take into account that activity and say, well, at the earlier hours of the trading session, I want my indicator to calculate more often because there's more trades. But the indicators that get applied to a time-based chart, they're calculated based on that time frame, not based on the activity, which is the contradiction here. But again, we're not saying that one is better than the other. We're just saying that everyone that's using TradeStation or any charting package should be aware of these things so that there's no misunderstanding or misinterpretation of the data. Now, of course, this is going to lead me to creating an activity-based chart, because if you're interested in volume and want your indicators to use volume, then let's talk about activity-based. Right here in the time frame, I have some tick charts. There's only 3 activity-based charting right here on this drop down: the 1 tick, the 10 tick, and the 25 ticks. These ones I tend to avoid. The word ticks, by the way, when you use it here in this context, means trades. It means transactions. When a buyer and a seller, they agree on making a transaction on Apple, that is a trade. that is a tick. It combines two parties, a buying party and a selling party getting together and creating a transaction. So if you have a 25 tick chart, that is a chart that is going to take 25 specific trades to build. You know, I can select it from here and show it to you. Let me select 25 ticks and see what it looks like. Here it is, 25 tick chart. On Apple, this is a very fast moving chart. You can see right here on the very far right as new candles are being built. Why? Because it only takes 25 trades. As soon as you have 25 trades happen in Apple, you'll get a new candle. Now, you see how fast this is happening over here? Well, let's slow down this a little bit by increasing the number of ticks. How many ticks should I use? It's the question, right? Well, when you're looking at a tick chart, volume right here at the bottom is giving you the number of shares traded every one of those 25 tick groupings. So for example, here we have a big spike. Everybody sees this cyan. Right here, the cyan bar is about 25,000 shares. What does that mean? What does volume mean in this context? It means that for that bar, for that candle that is made up of 25 unique transactions, those 25 unique transactions amounted for or accounted for the 25,000 shares traded. So if you were to create an average, about 1,000 shares on every single trade. Of course, that's not exactly how it happened. You know, there could have been, you know, trades that with higher number and lower numbers, but in total, those 25 trades had 25,000 shares traded. That's a big spike. You know, not all the trades are that big. If we look at this white bar over here at the bottom, this one only had about 7,700, but again, it's on 25 ticks. That number, the number that you selected as a time frame, 25 ticks, doesn't change. Every candle will include 25 transactions, and whatever you see at the bottom is exactly the number of shares that were traded. So we did talk about slowing this down, and we did talk about how many ticks should we use. Now, in order to have an estimated of how many or what the average number of ticks gets traded, this is what I would do. I would change my volume. Let me go here to a 5-minute again. So let me turn this chart into a 5-minute. If you want to get some sort of an equivalent to a 5-minute time frame, but also take into account volume, I want to see how many ticks are traded every 5 minutes, because it seemed like the 25 tick chart was a little too fast for my taste. I wanted to slow it down a little bit. So I need to choose a higher number of ticks, but I'm not really sure how many ticks are traded on each 5-minute bar. I know that in average, if you look at this volume average, in average, I see the number of shares. So in average is about 2 million shares for every 5 minutes. But how many ticks is that? One thing that I can do is I can modify the symbol, and I do that by double clicking on any of the candles. And right here, there is a setting for volume. Everybody sees where my cursor is. It says for volume use. And you have two settings for volume. One is trade volume, which is the default. That's what we're seeing right there at the bottom. And the other one is a tick count. So tick count is gonna count the ticks. I'm gonna click OK. And this is what I see right here at the bottom. You can see how the numbers changed. Now, instead of seeing the number of shares, I see the number of ticks. How many ticks in average does Apple trade? Well, here it says about 8,000 ticks. Of course, this is using 50 bars of history. So it takes, you know, a little bit of, it takes today's trading activity and a little bit of yesterday's, but I'm going to use that as an approximation. It doesn't have to be exact. In fact, I can round it up significantly if I want to have these round numbers, like a 10,000 tick if I want to. Since I don't have that, you know, selection here on the drop down, I can type it in. So 10,000, and I'm going to use the word tick. If you type that in into the command line and hit enter, it's going to split up your data into 10,000 ticks per bar. It's going to look much slower than that 25 tick that we created. And of course, if you load a 25,000 tick chart, in this case it's a 10,000, it's going to take longer to load. You can see that I have a gap here in volume. You can see that it says PD right here on the top left corner. That PD in yellow, what it stands for, it's pending data. So in the background, I'm loading data for Apple on a tick interval, and this is just trying to fill up, these gaps. But what happens right here on my chart? Well, what happens is that volume kind of flatlines right here at around 10,000, because that's what I selected as the number of ticks. I'm using volume as a tick counter. So volume at the bottom here is exactly doing that. It's just counting the number of ticks. And that's the reason why it looks like a flat line at 10,000, because when it reaches the 10,000, then it's going to stop and go to the next bar. Now, let's talk about this a little bit, because there's other information to consider. For example, let me close this a little bit more. Let me open it. Let me wait for the bar to close. The bar is about to close. It's already at 9,700. So as it reaches 10,000, we know that when it reaches 10,000, it's going to go to the next candle, because that's the way that the bar builds. So yeah, there we go. We're about 100 away, 50 ticks away. It reaches 10,000 and it drops again, and the counter starts again. So this value that you see here on the far right is just counting the number of transactions. And when it reaches 10,000, it goes to the next. If this is counting 10,000, why is the average not 10,000? Why is it 9,667? If every bar is 10,000, let me just check here. So this one, you can see the volume right there at the bottom, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. They're all 10,000 except for this one right here, the end of the session. Right here, the end of the session. Right here, the end of the session. Because when there's no more trading, when the session ends at 4 p.m. and there's no more trades, because this is not counting, the post market. This is just counting the regular session. But when the session ends, then there's no more trades. It stops right where it stops. No more trades. And that's why the average is off from the 10,000, because it's averaging or counting those bars that are not quite 10,000 because they were the end of the session. Does that make sense? All right. So if you look at the candles, though, they have a similar characteristic to the 5-minute, because we used the 5-minute chart as some sort of a benchmark or like a measurement, so that we could see how many ticks were traded on every 5-minute bar. And that's why this looks very similar, but it's not quite the same. And I want you guys to take a look at this. I'm going to check the times on these candles, and you can gauge the difference between them. From the very first candle of the day, the time here is 9:31:11. Why is the time of that bar 9:31:11? Again, we said it a moment ago. It's the closing time of the candle. So this candle that was looking for 10,000 trades closed at 9:31:11, which means that it only took 1 minute and 11 seconds to accumulate 10,000 trades for Apple. Very quick though, right? Now let's take a look at and compare the times of something that's happening right at noon. I'm going to take a look at this very last green candle and compare it to the next one. So this green candle ended at 12:51:31. It's a coincidence that it's the same 1 minute and 30, or this is 1 minute and 11 seconds. This is 1 minute and 31 seconds after the 12:50 mark, but that's okay. So the closing time on this green candle is 12:51:31. Let's keep that in mind, because we're going to do some math here on time. So from 12:51:31, let's check the close of the next one, to 13:02:24. It took all that time to build the same amount of trades. How many minutes is that? You know, from 1251, 31 to 1302, we're talking about 9, 10, 11 minutes, 11 minutes. So about 10 minutes, 10 minutes and 29, 40, 53 seconds, about 10 minutes and 53 seconds. So from one candle to the next, it took almost 11 minutes. Now that's a big difference. On the very first candle, it only took 1 minute and 1 minute and 11 seconds. On this bar, it's taking close to 11 minutes to accumulate 10,000 ticks. So you can see the difference. So what happens on this chart at the very beginning of the day? It is faster. Every candle closes faster. And if you have any indicators or any calculations going on the closing of these bars, then it'll have more chances to calculate because you have more activity. And this chart is based on ticks, not on time. And that's why some candles take shorter time, some candles take longer time. But it's an interesting way of looking at analysis, because the faster the trading gets, the faster the chart becomes. And in periods of slowing down, then the chart will slow down as well. All right. Another type of, and I'm reaching the end of the class because I want to show you the other type of volume charts, because in addition to counting ticks, we also have the ability to counting shares. And I think we saw that on the very first chart that we were on the 5 minute. Let me go here to a 5 minute. Let me double click on the candles, because that's how you change how the chart is reading volume. I'm going to set it to trade volume, which is the default. And on a 5 minute chart, we already looked at this chart. It's about 2 million shares traded every 5 minutes. We can do the exact same thing, but rather than counting ticks, we're going to count number of shares. So I'm going to type in 2 million and the word shares. When you type in 2 million shares, TradeStation is going to build that chart using the accumulation or the groupings of 2 million shares. I'm going to hit enter. Let's see when it loads. It's going to, yeah, you see how it looks very similar to the 5 minute chart. But then, again, this is counting number of shares. It's not counting time anymore. Even though it looks similar because we did the math. We looked at how many shares were traded on every 5 minutes. We use that same number and it looks very similar, but it's not time dependent. Take a look at volume. We see the same characteristic where it kind of flats line at close to 2 million, not quite 2 million because of these gaps that happen at the end of the day. And sometimes it'll be a little bit higher than 2 million. For example, let's take a look at the volume here on the prior bar. Everybody sees the volume right there on the bottom right corner. In cyan, it says 2,600,000. I'm sorry. Let me read that number correctly. 2,006,569 shares were traded on that bar. Why is it that it's not 2 million exactly as I created it? It's because TradeStation cannot split trades. So if there is a trade that makes it reach the 2 million mark, that trade cannot be split. And therefore, if there's more shares that exceeds the 2 million, they'll be left there. At least they reach the number or the target that you specified, which in this case is 2 million. And of course, we have those bars at the very end of the session that don't quite reach the 2 million because the session ends. But you can see the average is very close to 2 million. And we have that same behavior of bars that are building faster because there's more trading activity. Let's check the time here of the very first bar. You guys see that the closing time here is 9:30 and 40 seconds. It only took 40 seconds for you to accumulate 2 million shares of Apple at the very beginning or the very opening of the day. Let me check, the time on this last two bars. The time here is 12:57:07. The next one is 13:07:25. So we're talking about exactly 10 minutes and 18 seconds. 10 minutes you had to wait for Apple to trade 2 million shares. That's a big difference. Waiting 40 seconds versus waiting 10 minutes. And you can see the nature of the market. You're going to get more bars at the beginning of the day than you get at the very end. Well, at least faster. You know, if I draw a vertical line from the very beginning, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's put it right here. And if I count backward from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10 bars at the beginning, 10 bars at the very end. The very 10 bars took about, this is 9:58, took about 28 minutes. 28 minutes to build this. Now, what time is this? This is the time is 12:02 and it's already 13:01. So this is 1 hour and 11 minutes. So you can see the difference, 28 minutes versus 1 hour and change. So yes, the chart becomes more sensitive to volume. There's more candles if there's more trading activity. So it's a very interesting way of looking at charting, especially if you're following studies that are sensitive to volume, or studies where you should use volume in this way. Okay, any questions? I think that's all the information that I had for you. We just wanted to see what are the differences between a time-based chart and some of the intricacies and some of the things you have to keep in mind when using time, and also the same thing for volume. What are the types of charts that you can build? We looked at two. If you guys remember, we looked at the tick charts, the ones that count transactions, and then this last one, which counts the number of shares that were traded. This applies to futures as well. So if there's any futures traders here, the concept of shares and transactions applies exactly the same. You can build, and in futures, of course, it would be contracts, but it's the same concept. How many contracts or how many trades? Because in a trade, even though most futures traders will trade one contract, there are other businesses that are hedging their business and are probably trading more contracts than just a single one. So there's more trades accumulated that way. Luis is asking, are there footprint charts in TradeStation? That is something that I'm not aware of. I'm not really sure what a footprint chart is. So Luis, if you have an example, maybe you can send it to me. I know that there's some charts that change the thickness of the body of the candle based on volume. We don't have that type of chart. I've seen it in some other platforms where the more volume there is, the fatter the candlestick gets because of that volume. And if you have a skinny candle, it's because it doesn't have as much volume. So it creates an enhanced visual of where the volume is as well. We don't have that type of chart. Could it be created using easy language? Maybe, yes, because you can play around with thickness, and the thicker a line gets, I guess we can play around with that concept in easy language. Any other question? Okay, volume and imprint type. I see your comment, Ryan. Charts like Bookmap. Yeah, I'm not really familiar. If it's what I described, that the candles change thickness based on volume, I've seen those, but I'm not really sure what those are. If you guys, Luis, if you have a screenshot that you can share with me, I'll be glad to take a look and see if we have anything similar. So send it to me via email and I'll take a look, okay? If you don't know what my email is, jnava@tradestation.com. Anyone here can email me if you guys want, okay? All right, guys, I think this is it. I'm gonna end the class today. Thank you, Luis. Thank you for being here. Thank you for always supporting the masterclass. I want to wish everyone a great weekend. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you guys next time. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.